I want to begin by sharing with you a true story about a couple that I work with. I've changed their names and some of the details to protect the innocent. It may be you. But they're a couple that their situation is so representative of so many couples that I see. They could be anybody. And their names, just for sake of this example, are Dan and Marcy. Marcy came to see me without Dan. She couldn't get Dan to the first one. And this is what she told me as we began to counsel together that first time. I love him, but I'm not in love with him anymore. Marcy insisted as she described her marital problems in our first counseling session. It's not like I hate him, she continued. I just don't feel anything for him anymore. He doesn't seem to want to be with me anymore. He's always busy with work, and I usually just stay busy with the kids and other things. We never go out on dates alone anymore, and we're hardly ever intimate. I've even found myself thinking lately of some really terrible things, some negative thoughts that I don't even want to tell you about. I don't want my marriage to break up, but I can't imagine going on like this. I'm so lonely, and I feel so unloved. What do I do? How many times I've heard that expression? I love him, but I'm not in love with him anymore. Or I love her, but I'm not in love with her anymore. You know, as a marriage counselor, I see far too many marriages, even Christian marriages, that are breaking up. Met with a couple just this morning that it doesn't look good. And my heart was just torn up after the session. The divorce rate is something like 50% or more of all marriages now ending the divorce. The statistics also show by the 2000 census that the divorce rate has increased by 400% since 1960. Marriages are failing all around us. And one of the main reasons is because people fall out of love, or they think they've fallen out of love, or that's what they would say if you asked them. I love them, but I'm not in love with them anymore. I just don't have the feelings that I used to have. And so they think maybe it's time to trade this one in for a new thing. Maybe they can recapture that feeling with somebody else. Well, what happened to Dan and Marcy? What happened to them is what happens to so many other couples. So I want to tell you a little bit about them. They were once, as many of us, madly in love with each other. So what went wrong? After 2 years of courtship, the couple married while Dan was still in college. Marcy worked to help pay the bills. They didn't have much, really, they didn't have much of anything, but they were in love with each other, and they spent lots of time talking and just doing things together. Dan graduated a couple years later and got a good job with a large company. 2 years later, they had their first of 3 children, and Dan continued to climb the corporate ladder. While continuing to work intermittently between the pregnancies, Marcy finally decided, with her husband's support, to stay home with the children and work only part-time. As the children grew older and with Dan so involved in his work, Marcy looked more to her children's school and several civic organizations to fill her need for intimacy and adult companionship. After the second child was born, Dan really started golfing, hunting, and fishing more frequently. He justified it by saying it was his only stress relief, that if he didn't get time for himself once in a while away from work and the kids, that he'd go nuts. As time passed, evenings at home began to revolve around the kids, their homework, or school activities. Any free time was spent doing housework or slumped in a vegetative state in front of the TV. Usually Dan went to sleep first. Marcy frequently spent time on the computer and went to bed later. Dan was usually up early and left the house before Marcy and the kids got up. Weekends involved chores, committee meetings, or Dan participating in one of his hobbies. Family meals and quality time as a couple became very rare. Dan and Marcy seemed to be growing apart, living in their own worlds. They were living more as roommates, quite frankly, than a married couple. What happened? to the love that Dan and Marcy once felt for one another. It used to be that they couldn't wait to see each other, that they couldn't wait to talk to each other, to spend time together. They both loved their kids. They would even say they love one another. But as both would readily admit in counseling later, they were not in love with each other anymore. This is the story of so many couples. This is a normal couple. This is not a problem couple. This, I believe, happens in almost every marriage to some degree. It does happen in every marriage to some degree. If it hadn't happened to you yet, trust me, it will. That's why I wrote a book on marriage. That's why the very first sentence of the book is, I love him, but I'm not in love with him anymore. That's why the very first chapter is called When Feelings Fade. I could have called it Bring Back That Loving Feeling, or You've Lost That Loving Feeling, because it happens all the time. I've been married 20 years. It happened to me. The question is, what do you do about it? What does it really mean? What do people mean when they say, I love him, but I'm not in love with him anymore? What does that mean? What is love anyway? Let me just direct you to your outline. And I want to just share with you 4 different types of love. You know, when we say I love you in English, it can mean a lot of different things. But the Greek language, which was actually the language that the New Testament was written in, is much more precise, and there's actually 4 words for love. And it gives us a better understanding of what we mean when we say, I love him, but I'm not in love with him anymore. And there's 4 kinds of love, or 4 words for love in the Greek language. Under A, put eros. Eros is where we get the word erotic from, and it's the erotic or sexual kind of love. It's that physiological or physical chemistry that occurs between 2 people, that attraction, if you will, that draws people together at the very beginning, but usually fades over time. All of us are familiar with that. You see that kind of love exhibited in the Song of Solomon in the Bible. They used to not let Jewish boys read that before the age of 30 or before they got married because it was too erotic. I don't know if you know this or not, but in the Song of Solomon, it's written in the Bible, it describes a man and a woman making love twice in detail. Did you know that? That's why they study it in little old ladies' Sunday schools. They don't study that in little old ladies' Sunday schools. The Bible teacher would be saying, what do you think that means? And they'd go, I have no idea what that means. Another kind of love, B, is phileo. Phileo, Phileo, or Leaux, if you're a Cajun. Phileo. It's the affectionate or brotherly love. Phileo is where Philadelphia gets its name, from that root word. It's the city of brotherly love. It's an affectionate love or an affinity that you feel for someone because of the way they treat you or because of the way you feel about yourself when you're with them. It's an affectionate kind of love. Then C is sturgeon, which is a motherly or parental type love. And all of us who are parents know that the love you have for your children is a very special love. Most parents would sacrifice their life for their children. They'd throw themselves in front of their children to take a bullet if they were in danger. You can't always say that for your spouse. Sometimes you might want to be pushing your spouse in front of the bullet, depending on where you're at. But with your children can do anything and you don't stop loving them. With a spouse, not so sometimes. Special, different kind of love. And then D, agape. Agape love, incidentally, is the kind of love that is talked about in 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8, where it says love is patient, love is kind. That's agape. And if you look at that list of 16 characteristics, they're all attitudes and behaviors. God never in the Bible that I know of commands us to phileo or eros someone. He commands us to agape someone. Agape is unconditional love. Phileo, eros, and sturgeon are feelings. Agape emanates from your spirit, which is more than a feeling. We're going to talk about agape in the last of these 6 sessions, or in the 6th session, where we talk about true love more than a feeling. Tonight I want to focus on eros and phileo, because I think when Marcy was saying, I love him, but I'm not in love with him anymore, what she was saying is, I love him. She could have been saying, I agape him, but I don't phileo and eros him anymore. Y'all with me? Two authors, Les and Leslie Parrott, came up with this triangle that gives a better explanation of what love is. And if you'll look at the triangle that's displayed up here, this is a healthy love relationship. On the bottom, you see commitment. On the upper left, you see intimacy. And up at the upper right, on the right side, you see passion. Three components of a healthy love relationship. There has to be commitment. There has to be intimacy, which is personal sharing and doing things with one another, sharing your life with one another. And there should be passion, which is the feelings of romance. Well, over time, sometimes those sides can decrease. You can get a very little bit of passion, a little bit of intimacy, and a lot of commitment. Sometimes you can get a lot of passion with very little commitment. You can have all kinds of different things with that. But all three should be there if you want to have a healthy love. Now, if you take our words and you put it in that formula, agape would refer to commitment, phileo would refer to intimacy, and eros would refer to passion. You really need all three of those to have a healthy love relationship. The question is, what do you do when the eros and the phileo fade? Do you trade them in for a new one? Do you go seeking for it somewhere else? I don't believe you have to do that. I believe they can be regenerated. I believe you can bring back that loving feeling. But before we get to that, what I want to talk about is why and how feelings fade. And I want to go back to the story of Dan and Marcy and tell their story from each of their perspectives so you can see what happened to them. Because what happens to them, what happened to them is what happens to all of us in one form or fashion. So what happened to their love? How did their eros and phileo grow cold? First of all, from Dan's perspective. Dan believes that their problems really started around the birth of their first child. Marcy, from his perspective, stopped giving him time and attention. The baby seemed to get all the attention. Marcy always seemed tired and moody and didn't want to be physically intimate as much. And she often seemed frustrated or needy. Marcy also gained some weight, and she didn't seem as interested in taking care of herself or the house as much. Dan began to feel neglected and even jealous of the baby. You know, when we had our first child, I felt exactly the same way. I should have been happy that we had a child, but you know what? I went into a depression for 6 months. I was the oldest child. I was used to getting attention. I was used to having my wife's full attention. The baby comes, all of a sudden my attention is cut in half. If I was lucky, I got half. I was depressed. Now, I know you'll say, well, that's sick. Well, most of the men that I know, they go through some of the same things. Do any of y'all can relate to that, or y'all just think I'm a bad person? Well, Dan began to feel neglected and even jealous of the baby. As a result, now listen closely, as a result, Dan began to think and believe. Say, think and believe. Dan began to think and believe that Marcy didn't love him or desire him anymore. He began to think and believe that Marcy didn't love him or desire him anymore. Well, he wasn't good at communicating his feelings in the first place, and with the baby and the demands of his job, the time never seemed right to discuss his concerns. So he just stuffed his feelings and pulled away from her emotionally. Occasionally, he would lose his temper and he would say really hurtful things to Marcy when she didn't respond at his attempts at physical intimacy. He felt rejected by her, and though he desperately needed her and wanted to be close to her again, he withdrew and walled himself off more and more. Well, what about from Marcy's perspective? This, of course, is the right perspective. As we know, the women are always right. Marcy was thrilled to have a new baby with her husband, her soulmate, her lover, the man of her dreams. She desperately wanted Dan to share in this joyous experience with her, but she soon realized that raising a child was much more demanding than she thought it would be, and much more difficult. The baby didn't sleep well at night. Breastfeeding was difficult. She also experienced problems with her hormones and tended to be moody. She often felt tired, lonely, and overwhelmed. She looked so forward to Dan coming home at the end of the day because she missed him, but also she looked forward to getting some help with her child, with their child. Marcy knew Dan had just been promoted in his new job and that longer hours were necessary to get accustomed to his new responsibilities, but she grew increasingly more aggravated and resentful when he would come home tired and stressed night after night. She wanted him to be there for her, to take care of her, to share the load, to be excited about the baby. Though he seemed to love the baby and was glad to see her, he did very little to help with the diapers and the feedings. He never offered to get up with the baby at night. He often seemed aggravated if the baby didn't go to bed earlier, that the house was messy, or that she was tired. He seemed to talk less and go to sleep earlier. Can you relate? Marcy felt lonely. She desperately wanted to feel connected emotionally. She didn't feel like being sexual. Surely he could understand that. Surely he could understand that. Surely he must realize she was tired because of continuous sleep deprivation. Surely he knew that. Certain comments and angry outbursts by Dan about the lack of physical intimacy and about her needing to sleep during the day with the baby so she could have energy for him at night hurt Marcy deeply. As a result, and remember this, as a result of all those experiences, Marcy began to think and believe. Say, think and believe. Marcy began to think and believe that all Dan cared about was himself and his needs, that he cared more about sex than her. Marcy even began to believe that Dan resented the baby because he seemed to get angry if the baby was sick or if they couldn't do something as a couple because of the baby. She began to think and believe that all he cared about was himself, that he cared more about sex than her, and that he was resentful of the baby. Marcy tried to talk about it on occasion, but her words never seemed to come out right. Dan just seemed to hear her words as criticism or complaining, and usually reacted badly. He seemed to be pulling away from her. She felt desperate and abandoned. She began to feel angry. When she went back to work full-time, things got worse. She was even more busy, and she was even more tired and exhausted and had less time for Dan. She got to the point where she didn't even want to have time for him. Can you relate? There are two main points that I want to make, if you'll turn to your outline again, as to why and how love fades. Why and how love faded with Dan and Marcy. And even though your circumstances may be very different, maybe you don't have children. Everyone who has children can relate to this. But if you don't have children, your circumstances may be different, but the same thing happens in every marriage all the time. If it hadn't happened to you yet, it will. This is why and how love fades. Point number A is that thinking and beliefs change. Thinking and beliefs change. Dan had some experiences, remember, where he felt neglected and unappreciated by Marcy. And he began to think and believe that Marcy loved the baby more than him, and she didn't desire him or love him anymore. Y'all remember that? Those beliefs, in time, began to be like a pair of glasses that he put on, that he began to look at Marcy through. Those beliefs, in time, began to color his perception of Marcy. He began to look for that to be true, and even not to notice when Marcy's attitude or behavior suggested otherwise. In other words, he became to so believe that it was true that Marcy didn't love him or care about him that he didn't even see it when it was there. He began to look for it to be true. Y'all with me? He began to see her through this pair of glasses. Marcy, in the same way, had some experiences with Dan where she felt hurt and abandoned. As a result, she began to believe that Dan was selfish and self-centered, that he really didn't care about her or the baby, that all he wanted was sex. In time, these beliefs began to color her perception of things. She began to look for that to be true. Even when Dan would offer some caring, would try to help out, she wouldn't see it because she was wearing these glasses. She began to look for it to be true, and in time, these attitudes or beliefs began to color her feelings and began to affect her feelings. The glasses that Dan wore, looking at Marcy, began to affect how he felt and how he acted. The glasses that Marcy was wearing, her beliefs toward Dan began to affect the way she was feeling and the way she was acting. And it happens with every couple. They do something, they let you down, they hurt you, and you begin to conclude something to be true. You cop an attitude towards them. And you know what it becomes after time? It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know what a self-fulfilling prophecy is? Best example I ever heard of was this story that's told about this principal who had this class of children that were misfits. They were the troubled children in the school. And he went through teacher after teacher after teacher after teacher trying to find someone that could teach these kids. And the kids would run off every teacher because of their bad attitudes. Finally, this little old lady applied. And he was reluctant to let her, but he was desperate. And he was amazed by the fact that day after day he would go by the class and not a peep. Finally, he just got nervous and he was very curious, and he called the teacher in and he said, "Miss, I just have to ask you, what are you doing with these kids?" And she says, "Well, every day I just start out by telling them how smart they are and that they can become anything that they want to be." And he says, "What do you mean, so smart?" And she says, "Well, I just tell them how intelligent they are." And he says, "Where do you get that they're intelligent? This is a group of misfits." And she says, "Well, no, I saw their roster and I saw their IQs. And I just kept telling them that they have such high IQs that they're so smart that they can do anything." And he says, "What do you mean their IQs?" "Well, that list that you gave me." And he says, "Ma'am, those are not their IQs. Those are their locker numbers. 145, 160. She didn't know any different. She just thought that they were smart kids, and she told them so. And you know what? They rose to meet her expectations of them. You get what you expect to see. You get hurt. You develop a belief system, an attitude, and pretty soon your attitude colors your whole perception. You begin to see what you want to see, and it begins to affect your feelings and later your behavior. Another example of this is a position paper. Have you ever had to write a position paper? A position paper is where you take a position on something and you make your case and you try to convince other people to your position. Let's say I had to write one in college. And maybe I was going to a Christian college and I took a position on capital punishment. Well, depending on what part of the Bible I read, I could make a case for it or against it. I could pull scriptures to support my case. But let's say I don't really have an open mind. Rarely do we ever really have an open mind. I have a sister, and this is not true, I'm making this up. I have a sister maybe that was raped by a guy who was let off, raped someone else, and let off and got away with it. So I really thought the guy should have been put to death. You can understand that. If it was my sister, you might feel the same way. So I go write this position paper, but I don't have an open mind. I'm not going to the scriptures or going do research to try to, see what case I can make for it and what case I can make against it. I'm going with a bias. I believe in capital punishment because I have an emotional attachment to this thing. So I might be going through the research And I throw away everything that doesn't fit my belief system or my bias, and I keep stacking evidence. I keep looking for evidence that supports my belief. I keep looking for evidence that goes along with my bias, that makes my case. That's what we do in marriage. After your spouse has hurt you a few times, you come to a conclusion about them. It becomes a belief in your mind, and you begin going to work looking for evidence to support what you already have concluded to be true. You don't mean to do it, but you do it. You don't see them the way they really are. And when you're wearing these glasses, even when they do good things, you don't see them because you're wearing the glasses. You, in essence, become a garbage collector rather than a treasure hunter. Your mind goes to work collecting evidence to support what you already believe. And it affects your feelings, and it eventually will affect your behavior.